Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Arm Wrestling. Arm Wrestling is a spin-off game in the Punch-Out franchise, and it was developed by the same team, Nintendo R&D 3. Unfortunately for Nintendo, this one was not nearly as big of a hit as Punch-Out, and it even ended up only being released in the US, making this one of the few games Nintendo made that was developed in Japan but never actually released there. Another notable thing about this title was that it was the last original arcade game that Nintendo developed. While Nintendo still made arcade machines after this point, everything from here on out were all ports of their console games such as the Versus system, the Play Choice 10, and the Nintendo Super System. While you might be tempted to blame this game as why Nintendo started to back off from the arcade market, this change was a few years in the making. Nintendo R&D 1 haven't even made an original arcade game in the past few years, as they have shifted most of their focus to the Famicom at this point. That all being said, we will actually see one more arcade original in this challenge, R-Type, but that was a title that was developed and published by IREM in Japan, with Nintendo only publishing the US release. So, what makes this one a spin-off of the Punch-Out franchise and not part of a separate series? Well, I don't want to spoil too much, so let's find out. Similar to Punch-Out, this game features two screens, one for the stats and one for the gameplay. Another similarity is that you face off against a series of fighters, each having a unique personality and arm wrestling style. I guess this game takes place in a carnival of some kind, as you can see the man running the game in the top left holding the prize money. The player character himself looks a lot like the challenger from the Punch-Out games, although there's never been any official confirmation if this is actually the case. You might be wondering, how on earth do you make a game about arm wrestling? Well, I personally think they managed to do a pretty good job. Unfortunately though, it's kind of difficult to actually follow along with the visuals, but I'll do my best to explain them to hopefully help it make more sense. The first part of the controls is that most of the time you need to be mashing left. This is to simulate you constantly trying to push your arm to the left in an arm wrestling match. You can often tell when I'm mashing because you'll see my whole camera shaking. Something of note here is that the original arcade machine uses a joystick while I'm using buttons instead. This unfortunately results in a slightly inauthentic experience, as I imagine it felt a little more like an actual arm wrestle to constantly move the joystick to the left. Oh well, at least this way my arm probably won't get quite as tired. Every now and then, during a fight, the opponent will do a special attack. These are usually signified by a particular action of some kind and a sound effect. For this first opponent, this is signified by a snorting sound effect and steam blowing out of his nose. He's snorting. Once they do these attacks, if you just continue to keep mashing left, your opponent will stun you and move your arm a bunch to the right. While stunned, you have to mash the joystick left and right to regain control. To counter these attacks, you have to instead push the joystick to the right. Doing this with the correct timing will cause your opponent to get stunned instead, and a bunch of exclamation marks will appear above their head. Once this happens, you need to mash a button that was on the side for each of the exclamation marks, and getting all of these will cause the letters of power on the top screen to light up. Once they are all lit, you enter a special mode where you can mash left and make huge progress. It is through these counters that you make the most ground during these matches. So there you have it, mash left normally, push right when they attack, press the power button to fill up the power meter, and finally mash some more once you go into power mode. While that's the main gist of the controls, there are some extra components that get introduced in some of the later fights that I will go over once I get to them. The first opponent is the stud horse Texas Mac. Similar to the other arcade Punch-Out games, this one features a heavily compressed announcer, and he sounds pretty ridiculous at times.
Gentlemen, let the tournament begin.
In fact, this game is full of wacky and loud sound effects, and if you're the kind of person that hates noisy games like this, arm wrestling might not be for you. This first guy is pretty easy, but on my first run, I didn't understand the controls at all. Thankfully, the game actually gives you visual instructions for this first fight, which helped me to figure out how to actually play the game. I guess they knew this one was a bit tricky to understand at first. While I didn't get destroyed by the guy, I couldn't figure out how to activate the power mode, so I was never able to finish him off. You have only 1 minute to beat each opponent, and if you fail to beat them in time, they get some sort of burst of power and defeat you immediately. This happened on my first run, but thankfully this game gives you multiple chances to rematch your opponents. Unfortunately, my second run didn't go any better, and I ran out of time again. On the next match against him, I realized how the power mechanic worked, and I finally took him down. Next up is Kabuki, the sumo wrestler. Something I actually haven't gone over yet is that at the very start of the match, you have to wait until the word "Go" appears on the screen. If you press left early, you receive a penalty. This doesn't actually do anything if you do it just once, but if you do it twice in a row, your opponent automatically wins. On my first match against Kabuki, I accidentally got penalized twice and lost my very first match against him. Whoops. Thankfully, I still had a rematch, so I faced off against him again, and while I did much better this time, I unfortunately ran out of time. While this guy is actually pretty similar to Texas Mac, his special attack looks a little different, so it took me a bit to get good at countering it. Of course, it also didn't help that at one point I thought I lost when I hadn't, and I just stood there wasting time. You actually get more continues in this game than you did in Punch-Out, so I was able to rematch him again. Finally, on this third attempt, I had him figured out and I won. After winning this match, the guy on the top left threw a money bag at me. I didn't realize it at first, but this is actually an opportunity to earn some extra points, although you can actually fail to grab it and miss out on the points entirely. You have to push up at just the right time and catch the money bag he drops down. I had no idea what was going on at first though, and the money bag bonked my head and the guy just laughed at me. The next opponent was Mask X, a mysterious man with a secret identity. This guy was a notable step up in difficulty. The big thing that made him more tough was that he had a new move that could not be countered by pushing right. This move was a headbutt, and getting hit by it stunned you in a similar way to the normal attacks. Hold on, I feel like headbutting should definitely be considered cheating in an arm wrestling match. Anyway, it took me a while to figure this move out. It turns out when you push your hand to the left, your character automatically puts his head down, and by doing this with correct timing, you can dodge his headbutt move. Of course, he has another attack that you do have to push to the right for, so you've got to be paying attention to know which button to press. Another component that made this more tough was that there was no actual way to beat him normally. No matter how hard you try, you cannot push your arm all the way down to the left. Instead, your actual goal is to unmask him. Exactly how to do this isn't immediately clear. Once you've pushed Mask X all the way down to the left, he will do his headbutt move, and once you dodge that, a prompt appears to pull off his mask. To actually pull his mask off, you have to mash the up button. The only other place you use the up direction in this game is when catching the money bag, so it took me a while to realize what button I was even supposed to press here. I ended up losing a bunch to this guy, and I lost all my rematches. Similar to Punch-Out, I had to go all the way back to the beginning after losing, although at least this game does give you more rematches. Finally, on my next attempt, I managed to unmask Mask X. Pulling off the mask reveals that he is Bald Bull from Punch-Out. What an insane reveal. I guess this truly is in the Punch-Out universe. Anyway, I guess he gets so stunned by being unmasked that your character just automatically finishes the match and you win. Up next is a bizarre team of two, Alice and Ape 3. While you are actually arm wrestling the big mechanical monkey, it looks like she's the one controlling it from the side. According to the sign on the top screen, these two are apparently good friends. I'm not exactly sure why this team was allowed, but I guess it's time to prove that not even a machine can stop me. This fight is actually pretty straightforward, although it does have an ending gimmick similar to Bald Bull. The special attack of this one is super telegraphed, so getting counters is super easy. However, once you make enough progress, Alice lets out Ape 3's special move. The monkey pulls in a magnet and holds it up against your hands. Doing this causes his hand to be magnetized to the right with an incredible force, and after he does this for a handful of seconds, you'll lose. Come on, we've moved well past cheating at this point. Anyway, what you have to do is push to the right with correct timing while he's prepping the magnet. Doing this will cause you to grab the magnet and hold it up to the monkey instead, causing his arm to fall off and giving you an automatic win. Hey, if they're allowed to cheat, then so can I. I actually managed to pull this off on my first try, but apparently I just got super lucky. In future attempts, I failed at grabbing the magnet quite often. The window to grab it is quite small, and after a few misses, you just immediately lose the battle. Once you beat this team, you are taken to the final opponent in the game, Frank Jr. That's right, the final boss is basically just Frankenstein's monster, and boy was this guy tough. His attacks have much smaller windows to counterattack, so this one required some pretty fast reaction times. On my first match, after failing to counter his very first attack, he got a huge punish on me and I immediately lost. Ouch. This guy is so fast that I eventually just kept constantly swapping between pushing left and countering instead of reacting to it. I moved a little slower doing this, but it helped me to be much more consistent at countering his attacks. However, this guy has some tricks up his sleeve. Randomly throughout the battle, Frank Jr. holds his hand up and the text "Wait" appears on his hand. During this time, you can actually still move, but it doesn't do anything. After waiting for a while, he will suddenly attack, and the window to counter this is really small. I eventually realized he always moves his eyes right before he attacks, but there was one final trick up his sleeve that made this so much harder. Instead of ending the wait move with a normal attack, sometimes he ends by breathing out fire instead. This move is sort of similar to Bald Bull's headbutt, where you need to push to the left instead of the right. This means that you couldn't just rely on pressing right with the correct timing, you had to react to whichever move he was doing too. If you get hit by this move, you get scorched and lose the match immediately. Ouch. Because of this move, I had a really hard time countering his attacks after waiting, since I was always worried he'd do a fire move instead, and I could never react fast enough. I lost over and over to this guy. I lost to him so much more than anyone else in the game, and it took me quite a while to find a winning strat. Finally though, after many attempts, I had an idea on how to counter the two moves. I realized that with correct timing, I could actually push left and right quick enough that I could counter either of the two possible attacks. With this strategy, I was able to consistently counter his attacks, and after I countered his fire move successfully, I won the match. For some reason, Frank Jr. seems to weirdly enjoy his loss. Finally, I had beaten the last opponent. After this, the guy throws out another money bag at you. This one was unexpectedly huge though, and it bonked right into me. Kind of a sad ending, but oh well. Before moving on, there's something I noticed about this fight while reviewing my footage that would have made it so much easier. I thought he would randomly choose between the fire move and a normal attack, but it turns out that he would only do the fire move once you had him all the way down to the left. This meant that I didn't have to spend all that time trying to react to which move he did, as it was completely predictable when he was going to breathe fire. Dang, I could have beaten this guy so much sooner if I realized this while playing. Anyway, similar to the Punch-Out games, after you finish all the opponents, you loop back to the beginning and have to fight harder versions of each of them. Similar to those games though, I was content beating each opponent once, and my time with arm wrestling was complete. On to the review. I thought this one was pretty fun. It's not quite as deep as the Punch-Out games, but somehow it still manages to work pretty well despite its simple premise. The game's pretty funny too, and each opponent has a lot of character. It does feel a bit too simple though, and since the matches are quicker, it would have been nice if there were a few more opponents you had to face off against. Ultimately though, I definitely enjoyed this one, and it's a shame that it wasn't all that popular. I gave the game a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.